Hey guys, good to see you. So, boy, we're going to be back in the classroom soon. June 8th is only 3 weeks away. But until then, we still have a few more of these online units to cover. So let's take a look at what we've got here for today. Okay, so we're looking at Unit 4, Make-Believe Stories. During the coming 3 weeks, including this week, we're going to be doing an author study. What is an author study? I guess it's pretty obvious. We know that an author is somebody who's written a book or some articles, and we know what it means to study. So we're going to be studying an author. So when we do an author study, we read several books by one author, and we also will try to learn what we can about their life, maybe read a biography or autobiography, see if we can make some connections between their life and the kinds of writings that they created. Okay, so why would anybody do an author study? Maybe to come to appreciate an author more, to find connections between the author's life and their writing, as we said, to find common elements among the author's books, like themes or a certain style or characters or a message, common message, and to see how we as readers respond to the writing of a particular author. The author we are studying is Roald Dahl, pronounced Roald Dahl. Okay, so let's read a little bit about him. This is page 59 from your daybook. As a boy, Roald Dahl showed no signs that he would one day become a famous author. A teacher of his reported, "I never met a boy who so persistently writes the exact opposite of what he means." Although that wasn't a very positive bit of feedback. So interesting, he turned out to be one of the world's most famous authors. Although he got poor grades in school, Dahl loved reading stories, especially stories of adventure and exploration. Later, as a father, Dahl invented imaginative bedtime stories to tell his children. According to Dahl, a children's writer needs to have a lively imagination, a head full of tricks, jokes, and riddles, and the ability to make a scene come alive in the reader's mind. Okay, as we read these stories, we're going to see Dahl's humor, imagination, and see how he brings scenes to life. All right, this is one of Roald Dahl's autobiographies. This is obviously about his childhood, Boy, Tales of Childhood. You can read this book. There is a PDF that you can access through the website www.tavisdupree.com. Also, there is a link to a YouTube video with a reading of the book, a dramatized reading, and it's quite well done. It's entertaining. There's bits that are added, so it doesn't exactly follow the text of Boy, but the text of Boy is there. Okay, so yeah, we're definitely going to want to take a look at that as we go along. Okay, in today's lesson, we're going to look at the difference between realistic stories and fantasy elements in a story. Realistic and fantasy elements in a story. So we've already talked about that because we studied realistic fiction. When we explained that realistic fiction is stories where the character setting and the plot could be something that you could really encounter in the real world. But today, maybe It's not realistic fiction. We're going to be looking at the BFG by Roald Dahl. What does BFG stand for? I think most of you already know that BFG stands for Big Friendly Giant, BFG. So, what's it called when you make up a word like that out of the first letters of other words? This is called an acronym. So, BFG is an acronym for Big Friendly Giant. Can you think of any other acronyms? Here's two that you might have heard of. Radar, which is made up of the words radio, detection, and ranging. And SCUBA, I'm sure you've heard, self-contained underwater breathing apparatus. Acronyms, little tidbit, something extra you can learn out of this lesson. Do giants really exist in the world? You know, I'm getting bigger, but I don't qualify as a giant, I'm afraid. So obviously you know that they don't. Of course not. So what do we call a story that has unrealistic elements? Unrealistic elements like giants in it. Fantasy, right? Okay, a fantasy is a make-believe story that couldn't really happen. It might include make-believe characters, settings, or events. But even in fantasy, some of the characters, places, or events are like those in real life. So you get a mixture. You might think that's could be confusing, but I don't think so. Not for you guys, not at your age. Okay, so let's have a quick brainstorm. In the classroom, I'd be writing your ideas up on the board. Fantasy elements that could be used in a story. Maybe give you a second to think for yourself. What would you write down on this chart? Well, for characters, I've got witches, Thanos, Time Guardians, Mortlock. That's for characters. And then for setting, the future. So story where there's time travel and a magic kingdom. And for events, casting a magic spell or time travel, as we just mentioned. Okay, in your guiding notes on page 15, you've got the vocabulary section. Let's just quickly go over this and have a chit chat about it. So the first one, number one, the path beside a road for pedestrians. Pedestrians are people who are walking. Okay, so one of these words fits in there. Which one is it? So you've got human, pavement, peer through the window, obviously, misty moonlit street. That could be it. A deep breath, fantasy, or frozen with fright. All right, so yes, it's going to be pavement. Now, this is interesting because this is British English. So in British English, the pavement is like the cement, raised cement side part where people walk beside where the cars travel. Now, it's the opposite in North America, in Canada or the United States. The pavement refers to the black road top where the cars drive. So that could be a bit confusing. Just know that there's this difference between British English and North American English. Next one, number two, frightened and unable to move. I think this one's fairly obvious, frozen with fright. Next one, to suck in air, a deep breath. A person, another word that refers to a person, so obviously going to be human. A make-believe story. Now that's the focus of this lesson. We've already talked about it just now, fantasy. Easily understood. Obviously. Look through the window with difficulty. So here, the verb peer, means to kind of look like let's say you're looking through a small hole, maybe just a hole in a door, or looking through a crack, or else maybe you're looking through a window that's quite dirty so you can't see easily. And finally, a misty moonlit street. This is not a common vocabulary term, but it's just a phrase that's used in this story. Misty refers to, another word for misty might be fog, and moonlit. So we know what time of the day is it? Is it 12 o'clock noon, or is it 12 o'clock midnight? It's going to be at night, right? Okay, so let's have a read. Okay. All right, so I'll start at the top here. Roald Dahl once said he became a good storyteller as a result of inventing bedtime stories for his children night after night. He would often tell them stories about a friendly giant who roamed about at night, blowing dreams into the bedrooms of sleeping children. Dahl wove. Usually when we weave, we're taking threads and joining them together to make a fabric. Dahl wove these bedtime stories into the BFG, a fantasy about a big friendly giant. So he took a whole lot of stories that he told night after night to his kids, and then put them together and kind of connected them up into a story that made sense as a whole. A fantasy is a make-believe story that couldn't really happen. It might include make-believe characters, settings, or events. But even in a fantasy, at least some of the characters, places, or events are like those in real life. Okay. All right, let's go on. From the BFG by Roald Dahl. Incidentally, this is chapter 2 of the book, and on the website, you can find a reading of chapter 2 of the whole chapter. From the BFG. It wasn't a human. It couldn't be. It was 4 times as tall as the tallest human. It was so tall, its head was higher than the upstairs windows of the houses. Sophie opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. Her throat, like her whole body, was frozen with fright. This was the witching hour, all right. The tall black figure was coming her way. It was keeping very close to the houses across the street, hiding in the shadowy places where there was no moonlight. On and on it came, nearer and nearer. But it was moving in spurts. It would stop. Then it would move on. Then it would stop again. But what on earth was it doing? Aha! Sophie could see now what it was up to. It was stopping in front of each house. It would stop and peer into the upstairs window of each house in the street. It actually had to bend down to peer into the upstairs windows. That's how tall it was. It would stop and peer in. Then it would slide on to the next house and stop again and peer in, and so on, all along the street. It was much closer now, and Sophie could see it more clearly. Looking at it carefully, she decided it had to be some kind of a person. Obviously, it was not a human, but it was definitely a person. A giant person, perhaps? Sophie stared hard across the misty, moonlit street. The giant, if that is what it was wearing a long black cloak. In one hand, it was holding what looked like a very long, thin trumpet. In the other hand, he held a large suitcase. The giant had stopped now right in front of Mr. and Mrs. Gucci's house. The Guccis had a greengrocer's shop in the middle of the high street, and the family lived above the shop. The two Gucci children slept in the upstairs front room. Sophie knew that. The giant was peering through the window into the room where Michael and Jane Gucci were sleeping. From across the street, Sophie watched and held her breath. She saw the giant step back a pace and put the suitcase down on the pavement. He bent over and opened the suitcase. He took something out of it. It looked like a glass jar, one of those square ones with a screw top. He unscrewed the top of the jar and poured what was in it into the end of the long trumpet thing. Sophie watched, trembling. She saw the giant straighten up again, and she saw him poke the trumpet in through the open upstairs window of the room where the Gucci children were sleeping. She saw the giant take a deep breath and woof! He blew through the trumpet. Ooh, so intense, so dramatic. What's the mood of this? While you know now, because of your general knowledge, that BFG stands for Big Friendly Giant. If you didn't know that, what would you be feeling about this giant right now? Seems a bit dangerous and sneaky and mysterious and not at all friendly at this point. Let's go back and take a little bit more careful look at some of the text. Okay, so it wasn't a human. It couldn't be. So it's very tall. So really showing how tall it is. Sophie has gotten up. It's nighttime. She's gone to her window and she's peeking out. She opened her mouth to scream. It's terrifying, but she's frozen. She's so scared. She can't even scream, thankfully. It was the witching hour. This is a common term that means around midnight, very late, middle of the night. And why is it called the witching hour? A long, long time ago, people really believed in witches and probably thought that at this time of night, this is when all the scary, nasty things came out, like the witches. Okay, so the tall black figure, the fact that it's dressed in black, wearing this long black cloak, adds to the sense that this is not a friendly giant. I wonder why Roald Dahl starts out, this is chapter 2, and this is our first meeting with the giant. Why does he make the giant seem so scary? I wonder. It's a good question. We can discuss it a little bit later. So it's quite suspenseful the way he writes. Suspense means to build a kind of scary excitement. So he moves suddenly, moves closer and closer and closer. What on earth was it doing? What on earth is a common expression. It just means crazy. What is this? What? Sophie could see what it was doing. Okay, some explanation here. It's so tall that it bends down to look in through the upstairs window, so emphasizing how big it is. Very strong fantasy element there. Definitely a giant. Definitely not just a big person. So Roald Dahl makes a distinction between person and human here, which is a little bit interesting. I guess what he's trying to suggest is it's not human, as in it's not a normal person like us, but it's a person in that it's shaped. It has the shape of a normal person, of a normal human. Perhaps it even speaks like we do. but it's somehow not one of us. It's different from us. So here again, the black cloak, sort of mysterious things he's carrying and the way he's dressed adds to the sense of suspense. So I like the name of the family that lives across the street, the Gucci's. It's quite a funny word. When you tickle a baby, you often say Gucci, 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 Gucci. So it's kind of a cute word. Quite a contrast here between the scariness that Dahl is building up in his description of the giant, and then when he talks about the Gucci's, gives them this funny, cute name, and when he describes them here, this is just normal, just nothing scary about it. He describes that they're just a normal family, and they have their own business. It's a greengrocer shop, sells a store that sells vegetables mostly, and it's on the high street. So high street is another word for main street. So obviously this is not a very large town. It's a smallish town, and it's got one most important road that goes through the middle of it where all the businesses are, and this would be called the main street, or in England, the high street. Okay, the giant was peering into the window. Okay, and then he takes his trumpet out and puts something in it, and then blows something in through the window. And yes, so great sense of suspense. And the obvious question is, if you were reading this for the first time, you'd be wondering, what on earth has he blown into their room? And even if you know the story, later on in your guiding notes, you're going to be writing about what you would be blowing in uh, into the room. And my question for you now is, what do you think it is? I think a lot of you have read the book already, so you know that he's blown some good dreams in. Okay. All right. So, as we said before we read the story, that fantasy stories not only have fantasy elements, but they'll also have parts of the story that could be real. So, on page 16 of your guiding notes, I want you to quickly make some notes about what you think from what we read could be real, and what definitely is not real or fantasy. And the fantasy part is probably the easiest. Obviously, the giant. Um, and given your knowledge of the story, you probably know that the jar and the trumpet have some special magical qualities to them. So you could include them in the fantasy side. And in terms of real, well, the giant's not real, but are there real people in the story? Yeah, Sophie's real. Sophie's realistic. So are the Gucci children, and the Gucci's house across the street seems real, and other things as well. On the bottom of page 16, have you ever had a dream about something that could not have happened in real life? Describe it below. So, be great if I really love dreams. I think dreams are most interesting. So I hope you will um, think back and try to come up with your most amazing and interesting dreams. And I'd love if they were actually dreams that you had. I'll tell you about a fantasy dream I had that was quite amazing. I was already a man, but I was a young man at the time, and I had fallen asleep on the sofa in the living room, and I dreamt that there were some kind of spaceships, aliens had come to Earth, and their spaceships were not what you'd normally think of as spaceships. They were like sort of chunks of land with castles built on them. and there was a number of them floating in the sky like giant cloud castles. And I remember the people were all excited to go and to run up and take a look. And I remember in the dream I was cautious, and I thought, no, you could catch some kind of strange diseases that we haven't ever been exposed to before. You better not go. And the funny thing about this dream was, I woke up and thought, wow, it was so real and so strange. And then I fell asleep again, and I went back into the same dream. And this happened like 3 times. So if you have an interesting dream, please share it with me there on page 16. On page 17, here, just illustrate some these parts of the story that are given in text, and then choose 2 other parts of the story. Write a sentence or 2 down and illustrate it. Very straightforward. Page 18. Now, what happened after the giant blew the trumpet? Imagine and develop the story. This is what I was talking about before. Now, I'd like you, if you've read the book or seen the movie, there's more than one movie has been made actually. Wipe that from your mind. This should be just your own ideas, like so continue the story, and there should be like 3 sort of steps in terms of what happens here. These are not 3 different stories. This is your continuation of the story in sort of 3 parts, 3 chapters, or 3 paragraphs. Then on page 19, imagine that you are a big friendly giant. What kind of dreams would you bring? Describe one of the dreams. So would you bring dreams that teach kids some important lesson or help them to grow? Or would you bring dreams that are just fun, joyful, visiting Ocean Park? Or would you bring bad dreams? Would you want to scare the kids? It's wide open, up to you. Try to write it in a nice fictional style. You could even include dialogue, would be nice. Okay, so a recap of this lesson. We're beginning an author study, and we'll continue to discuss that more as we go along in the following 2 units that come after this. And in this unit, we're focusing on fantasy as a fiction genre. Okay, that's it for today, folks. Thank you for your time. Good luck with your work.